So we're back in my car for Hebrews 5. I'm actually going to jump in at the end of Hebrews 4 because the tone shifts a little bit at the end of Hebrews 4 from verse 14 onwards. And we get introduced to Jesus as our great high priest. Now, just as Hebrews 1 talked about the fact that Jesus is superior to the angels, Hebrews 1 and 2, and Hebrews 3 and 4, we learned about the fact that Jesus is superior to Moses. Now, in the next few chapters, we're going to hear about the fact that Jesus is superior to the priests, even the greatest priests we can imagine. And the word priest might conjure up some different things depending on our experience. But the priests that we're talking about in the Old Testament were men who were divinely appointed with the task of devoting themselves to a life of servanthood, praise, worshipping God, and presenting sacrifices for their people, on behalf of their people. So whatever priest means to you now, I want you to consider the fact that these were incredible men who were in pursuit of a pure and blameless and holy life. In fact, we know that in the Old Testament, the priests who didn't live that way, they were quite severely punished, maybe even killed, for not taking their role seriously. So the majority of priests that we encounter in the Bible, they were men earnestly trying to live out the call that God had placed on their life, a call that they did not pursue for themselves, but that God placed on their life. These were good, honest men who would literally carry the names of their people by their heart. They would carry the burden of their people and offer sacrifices in an attempt to see those people made holy. So really good and righteous men. But here in Hebrews 5, we understand that Jesus is greater than even the most holy person that we can encounter. Even these priests of the Old Testament, Jesus is far above those people. And so Saf mentioned this yesterday. Thanks, Saf. In the comments at the end of Hebrews 4, it says, "Let us with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we might receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Why can we do that with confidence? Because we have a great high priest. He understands our weaknesses. He has walked a life on earth, and yet he was never sinful. He never rejected salvation, was tempted to mistrust God or doubt God's promises, become cynical, become doubtful. Jesus never did any of those things. And he offered a sacrifice for us that is perfect, that is beyond anything we could ever do ourselves, and requires no top-up. It requires no top-up. We are accepted because of the sacrifice of the greatest high priest there ever was. So I just want to pull out a couple of things from this chapter. Verse 4 reminds us that priests don't take this honor for themselves. God called them. And verse 5 says, "So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but he was appointed by God." You know, he was sent on our behalf with a godly mission on his life, and he lived it out perfectly. But also we see in verse 7, it says, "In his days in the flesh," his days on earth, "Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence." Jesus offered up prayers on our behalf then, and he continues to do so. But these supplications, these are passionate cries out to the throne room of God. It's this desperate plea to be heard on our behalf. And even though he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. None of us wants to suffer. A life of suffering is not at all something that any of us would desire. But it's amazing how that suffering can actually be a tool in God's hand to teach us obedience. We don't learn very much obedience on the good days. We don't learn a lot of obedience when everything is going our way and, you know, life is perfect. We actually learn obedience in the times when it's hard to obey, in the times when it's challenging, when we're suffering. That's where obedience is formed. Jesus was perfect, but he even learned obedience through suffering, the suffering of mankind. And because he walked the journey of mankind, he understands what our obedience feels like, but also that it can be achieved. So he was made perfect, and he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. What an amazing promise we have in Jesus. Listen, an immediate practical application of this for me is the consideration of how I place leaders in my life and where I place Jesus in my life. I have the privilege of having incredible godly leaders, and I'm grateful for them. But do I go to church on a Sunday expecting God to speak through my leaders? Or do I go to church knowing that Jesus can speak to me personally as my priest? Do I understand that I don't just get to hear from him on a Sunday through men and women of God, but actually I can hear from him anytime, any point in my week, because Jesus is the one who can minister to me, and Jesus is the one who's paid it all for me. That's just an immediate application, you know, this parallel between Old Testament priests and how we view our leaders today. Yes, they're good, godly people, but actually Jesus comes above those people, those podcasts we love, those preachers we love to listen to. They're amazing and they should bless our faith, but nobody comes above Jesus in the pursuit of holiness and righteousness in our lives. So I'm just going to invite you to share whatever stood out for you in Hebrews 5, and we'll come back tomorrow for Hebrews 6.